Hi, I'm Eric Wardweaver Sjerven, Gothi of the Ridgar folk here in East Texas. I'd like to welcome you to the Raven's Call. This is a show where I sit and discuss whatever random heathen subjects come to mind. And sometimes I discuss a little Heathenry 101, sometimes I go a little bit deeper off into the woo-woo, as I am oft given to do. Well, today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the Vaettir. These are spirit entities that exist in the spiritual realm alongside us in the material realm. And I'm going to try and break down how I see the Vaettir. Keep in mind, this is just my thoughts. This is how I see the world and how I see the spirits. It does not necessarily translate to all heathens. Again, no two heathens ever see heathenry exactly the same way. It's just kind of the way it is. Especially in olden times, no two tribes worshipped the same way, believed exactly the same things. There were some key elements that seemed to go across the board as far as heathenry went. But there were minute differences from tribe to tribe, cult differences in how the individual tribes and individual households within those tribes practiced heathenry and saw the world. So, this is the Vaettir, the way I see it. The Vaettir are the spirits of the land, the spirits of the world around us. They're spiritual beings that coexist with us as we exist in the material plane. The Vaettir exists some in the material plane, some in the spiritual plane, and then some transition back and forth. Now, essentially, they are their own beings. They have their own consciousness. They have their own personalities. They have their own energies about them. And they exist in everything, from the rocks, the trees, the birds, the bees, everything. Some of them are grand and expansive. Some of them are the little beetle that crawls across the ground outside. They are life energy. And they're something that is a very important part of heathenry. Now, different tribes will vary on how they see the importance of the Vaettir in the relationship, in their grand relationships of heathenry. I count them as one of the main four. I'm always talking about heathenry as a folk way of relationships. We have our relationship to the gods and goddesses, our relationship to the ancestors, our relationship to our folk, and of course, our relationship to the Vaettir, the spirits of the land. Now, I see the spirits of the land as existing as spiritual beings. We have the physical world, the material world in which we live, and then right next to it, still part of Midgard, still part of our existence, is the spiritual world. Some humans are perceptive of this world, receptive to the energies in it, and can interact with them. We see that in a lot of seed work and some of the magical practices, the more spiritual practices, along with heathenry. Now, this differs, of course, from the religious practices, which focus specifically on our interactions with the sacred and the divine, the gods and goddesses. The gods and goddesses exist in sacred space, we exist in profane space, and the spiritual realm is another part of that profane space. It exists here in our world, in Midgard. And so the Vaettir are the living, breathing spirits of everything around us. The reason I count them as one of the major relationships within heathenry is because we are dependent upon the Vaettir for food, for shelter, for water, for all of these things. And we have to coexist with them. We see less of that in modern times because we live in a consumer-based society where everything is bought at the store and we are disconnected from the production of our food sources. We go and buy a house, we buy land. We don't have to necessarily work it the way that our ancestors did. We don't have to go in and completely clear cut and build a house by our hands, etc., etc. Some people still do and have a unique relationship with their land as a result of that. Some people do still farm, garden, things like this. They have a unique relationship with their land because they work it. They build the relationship. And that's the key thing here, is that in heathenry, we have to take the time to build relationships, just like we do within our tribes, between tribes, just as we build a relationship with the gods and goddesses, with our ancestors, we build a relationship with the land around us. Now, I'm going to break down just a little bit on how I see the hierarchy of the Vaettir, because I see the Vaettir as having a social structure all their own, but not completely alien to us. They are primal, they are natural forces, and so they have their own way about things. And I see the Vaettir as having multiple levels. Okay, we have the introductory level, which is pretty much the birds, the bees, the rocks, the trees, everything that we see existing within the material plane. These are what I would call lower level Vaettir. And then a step up from that, we have kind of the mid-level Vaettir. And these are the ones that exist both in the material and in the spiritual realm. They can kind of pass back and forth. This is the realm of some of the fairy folk, some of the folk stories that we heard back in the day that we still pass along in our modern societies, at least those that have a mind to do so. You think about things like the Huldra, the fairy folk with the cow's tail, said to be Freya's folk, who are helpful on farms and especially in birthing of calves and seeing to the herd. These creatures exist somewhat in the material world, and then all in the same can disappear into the spiritual realm. They pass between those freely. They have the energy to pass back and forth between those realms and the desire to do so, the level of consciousness to do so. And then, of course, above that, you're going to find what I call alpha or the high-level Vaettir, which are going to be like localized gods almost. You have a spirit of the lake that is like the god of the lake. And that spirit sees to the well-being of the lake and all of the other Vaettir that are underneath it. I find that the more animalistic or the more natural Vaettir are more of a pack dynamic, as we see exhibited in the lower level Vaettir out in the wild. You know, if you look at a wolf pack, you've got the alpha, you've got the different levels, and everybody falls into place just kind of naturally in the pecking order. I feel that the Vaettir exhibit much the same. It operates that way across the spiritual boundary as well. And so they have the alphas, they have their mid-levels, and they've got their grunt work lower levels. All of them wonderful beings and incredible. Some light, some dark, some baneful, some boonful. It entirely depends on that individual spirit and their own individual personality. Now, this is the animalistic or natural style of Vaettir. There's also a more humanoid type Vaettir as well, which these can sometimes take on more of a society like we know. If you look at, I find that, for example, the fairy folk of Ireland, if you look at the fae folk there, they follow a structure that is very much akin to a human hierarchy, for lack of a better word, as far as, you know, king, queen, and then underlings and different levels and responsibilities therein. I find that this is probably because these spirits are more closely tied to the spirits of man. Mankind ourselves are Vaettir. That's something that I don't see touched on a whole lot, but we are spirits that exist within the land. The only difference is the kind of touch of divine spark that we have from the gods and goddesses. They give us the consciousness and level that we do. Again, I'll get into that when I do my whole soul complex video, but that's a thought process for another day. These humanoid Vaettir tend to be the fae folk that we know of, the pixies, the nixies, and things like that. We see them in like the Tomte and the Nisse. These are more drawn to interaction with humankind, whether that be for, you know, their own pleasure, or if they seek to help mankind, or if they seek to hurt mankind. It all depends on their own individual personalities and inclinations. So they will follow more of a tribal or you know, the hierarchy of that nature, with clear tiers and a social contract all their own. And so these are two aspects to that world that we can't normally see. There are individuals that are gifted, like I said before, that can see this, that can interact with that. And so they have a better idea. Again, this is all based on my own experience and my own insights, so you're not going to find this written down in a book somewhere. This is the Vaettir according to Eric, so take that for what you will. But our interaction with the Vaettir is very important. I want to touch on one basis, specifically on the humanoid Vaettir, that I find interesting. And that is, you can find in some of the sources, especially if you look back to old funeral rites and burial mounds, the mound culture of arch-heathen times, there was a belief, at least a seeming belief, that there was a part of the spirit, a part of the soul that remained with the body once it passed. Now again, I'm going to break into all this when I do my soul complex video. That will be a big long one. But essentially there's multiple parts of the soul, some that pass on more to the spiritual plane, some that stay very much in the physical material world. And so when the body passes, the lich passes, and is returned to the earth, all of those energies that are tied up with it remain there. Those energies and that bit of consciousness that remains with it, that piece of us that is still there in the mound, can become a land spirit, can be tied to the location. And there's plenty of references, if you look back at like the Heimskringla and the Eddas, of kings that would go out and sit on the mound and seek the insight of previous kings or chieftains to get wisdom, to gain luck in governing their people. Similarly, there was a practice of making offerings to fallen kings or chieftains whose souls, whose spirits were thought tied to the well-being of the land. They would bring offerings to the funeral mound in order to appease the spirit, to keep the spirit strong, because its energy was tied to the well-being of the land. If you wanted good crops, you made offerings to this fallen king. And so this is a tradition that went on, and is largely, I think, part of why we had a funeral mound or a burial mound culture in the first place, was the proximity and the access to that spiritual entity, because they are tied to a specific location. Even in the times where, funeral pyres were the case, and bodies were burned, a lot of times those ashes were then interred in a funeral mound and tied to that location, because again, the energies that made up the body were reincorporated into the natural world around them. So this is a way that spirit, that human spirit, returned to the earth and became a protective, sometimes spiteful, depending on the individual, spirit for that land. And they would watch over the land of their families. They would give blessings, they would give boons, they would pass out the luck. People would visit the graves and would honor these ancestors so that they would continue to grant them luck, would continue to grant them boons. And so this spirit, this physical person became a Vaettir. And this is a fascinating concept to me. I love the beauty of it, the way that the body returns to the earth, back to Ymir's flesh, and is reincorporated and is still part of the grand process that is life on Midgard. So this is a real rough breakdown. I can go on for hours, as my tribesmen can attest to. I can ramble on for a great deal of time on the Vaettir. One of the things that I find very interesting is if you look at cryptids in modern time, if you look at things like Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the Yetis, if you look at Chupacabra, the Wendigo, different folk stories that have come up throughout time, you will find that these are mid-level Vaettir. These are spirits that can pass in and out of those worlds. So yes, for risk of sounding crazy, I very much believe these things exist. I do not necessarily believe that they completely exist on the material plane. I think they flit in and out. So woo-woo warning on all of that. But same thing with the Loch Ness Monster. I think there's an element of truth to that, but I don't think that it's purely a physical entity that we are seeing. So this is where a lot of you are going to brand me as crazy, but that's fine. So that's a fascinating thing to run down. That mid-level Vaettir, the interaction with the Fey folk, with the cryptids that we know of in modern society. It's incredibly interesting. On the subject of like the alpha level Vaettir, okay, just to kind of give you an idea of how I was thinking about that on the natural side of the Vaettir. My old tribesmen and I used to run around the bottoms down in Tennessee Colony all the time. And we came to know the spirits of that land fairly well, especially him, because he spent a lot of time down there. And after a long time, he came to know the alpha level spirit that oversaw the entire swamp down there. It's a very primal spirit, a very predatory spirit, very dangerous. Not all of them were like that, but this one was. This one we named Fendraka, which basically means swamp dragon. And he oversaw all of that. If you wanted to have good hunting down in the bottoms, you had to appease Fendraka. And we saw very real results with working with Fendraka. And you definitely respected the power of that Vaettir, or things would go very, very wrong for you. A lot of times in modern society, you'll see representations of the Vaettir in modern media. And they're never called the Vaettir, they're never called Vaettir, things like this. They're land spirits. Land spirits are recognized across multiple cultures. And that's part of the reason why heathens and Native Americans seem to jive so much in our ideology, is because we both have a respect for the spirits of the land. Shinto, Japanese Shinto had a huge focus on land spirits, and in that way jives heavily with heathenry in that respect. And so out of Japan, we see some fairly interesting media that also touches on these subjects. And one of the movies that I find gives a wonderful example of how I see the hierarchy of the Vaettir in the natural world is the movie Princess Mononoke. This is a Studio Ghibli film, Hayao Miyazaki. It's an absolutely fantastic film if you haven't watched it, but this isn't a video review, so we're not going to go into that. What I am going to touch on is how they lay out the Vaettir. If you've watched the movie, you'll know that there are, like, take for example specifically the boar within Princess Mononoke. You've got the lower level boar, the mindless boar that run around and just do boar things. And then you've got the great boar, the boar god, who oversees all of these. And where he goes, they follow. He is their king. He is their god. He is their leader. And he exists within the great forest and interacts with the gods of the other tribes as well. You've got the tribe of the wolves, the tribe of the monkeys. All of these interact. And this is mid-level Vaettir. Then you have the spirit of the forest, the night walker. This is the alpha level Vaettir of the entire forest. And it has immense power, and it does not manifest in the material world in a manner that we would normally see as an animal, because its form is less set, and it is incredibly powerful. And it is the spirit and life essence of the forest itself. This is very much how I see the Vaettir. So if you want kind of a visual representation on how I see the Vaettir working, check out Princess Mononoke as an example. There are multiple others, and I'd love to do other videos on heathenry in modern media, maybe an idea in the future. But give it a look. Just keep in mind, it is from a Japanese point of view, so it's not going to be perfectly heathen, okay? And it is a story about the human interaction with those spirits. But again, it's a wonderful look at how human interaction with the natural world both benefits and is hindered by the power of the Vaettir and the impact that we have on the Vaettir in our actions. Because if we drive the Vaettir out, if we drive out all of the life force of an area, then it's going to die around us. If we pave over everything, cut down all the trees, drive out all the animals, then the alphas are going to go with them to watch over their creatures, their spirits. And we will be left in a desolate wasteland. There are areas on Earth right now that have suffered from exactly that, and we continue to do that on a regular basis. We have to have a symbiotic relationship with the Vaettir if we are going to be able to exist in this world for any length of time. So that's a whole nother subject for another day. So give the movie a look. Think about the Vaettir around you. Get to know them better. If you really want to know your land, if you really want to have benefit from your garden, get to know the low-level Vaettir that you're going to interact with. Those are going to be the ones that you'll see first. Those are going to be the creatures that are in and around. And then the mid-level Vaettir are going to see how you treat those creatures. They're going to judge you by your deeds and your actions, just like we judge each other by our deeds and our actions. And then they will either choose to give you gifts or to be a bane to you. That's just how it works. So look around, see about your own interactions with the Vaettir. Get to know them. Build a good, positive relationship. Give gifts. Spend time. If you know you're going to have to clear cut a part of the property, appease the Vaettir first. Let them know that you don't mean them any harm, but you need this, and that you will work this land in such a way that you can continue to coexist. Change is not something that the Vaettir are going to be particularly interested in, especially when it's something that we force on them. we have to go out of our way to show them that the change isn't necessarily a bad thing and that we can work together. So I'll ramble on forever. So without any further ado, I'm going to thank you for watching the video today. If you liked what you saw, give it a like, shoot a comment down in the section below, and subscribe to my channel. The more you interact with these videos, the more you're going to see them pop up in your feed. Also, the more you interact with them, the more you're going to see other videos like mine pop up in your feed, and maybe from other production companies or from other people, whatever. If you're interested in Heathen stuff, interact with Heathen videos, hit like, comment, things like that. The YouTube algorithms will do their magic, and suddenly you'll see a lot more Heathen related things pop up in your feed. I also have a Facebook group called Word Weaver Productions. This is Word-Weaver Productions. You'll find it on Facebook. Just give it a search. Join the group. I like to put my videos up there as easy access, so you guys will see what's going on there. I also communicate with my my user base in that respect because I get a lot of feedback from you guys. I like to hear what you're thinking. I like to know what works, what doesn't work. What kind of technical issues are you seeing in the videos? What kind of subjects do you think that I need to cover? What would you like to hear me talk about? What would you like to hear me talk less about? Am I rambling too terribly much and you want me to streamline things a little bit more? The video's too long. That I know is probably a thing, but I ramble on, so I'm not sure how much I can do about that. So, without any further ado, have a great day. Thanks.